Okay. Imagine a Joyful Economy by James Gustave Speth and Peter Denton. An important contribution to the pressing global discussion and activism about restoring, nourishing, and sustaining human and natural communities. So this book is a welcome addition to the emerging discussions of integrating ecology, economics, politics, ethics, and values. It urges us to rethink how we create thriving social economic systems for the flourishing of the Earth community. We are indebted to Speth and Denton for articulating these new directions in a clear and accessible manner. That is Marilyn Evelyn Tucker and John Grimm, directors from Yale. So yeah, I'm just going to read as much as I can. So, introduction. In his 1976 book, The Joyless Economy, Tibor Skitovsky saw environmental neglect and other problems as results of a very American pattern of putting the earning of money ahead of the enjoyment of life. More than 4 decades later, his observation remains valid. In this essay, I will explore the transition from a joyless economy to a joyful one. In the joyful economy, the goal of economic life is to sustain, nourish, and restore human and natural communities so that the material and non-material blessings of life are available to all. It is a new system of political economy that gives true and honest priority not to profit, production, and power, but rather to people, place, and planet. Its watchword is caring for each other, for the natural world, and for the future. I will argue that promoting the transition to such a new political economy should be the central task of new environmentalism. To guide us, we desperately need a new American dream, a dream of an America where the pursuit of happiness is sought not in getting more and spending more, but in the growth of human solidarity, devoted friendship, and meaningful accomplishment, where the average person is empowered to achieve his or her human potential, where the benefits of economic activity are widely and equitably shared, where democracy and civic participation flourish at all levels, where the environment is sustained for current and future generations, and where the virtues of simple living, community self-reliance, good fellowship, and respect for nature predominate. These traditions do not always prevail today, but they are not dead. They await us, and indeed they are currently being awakened across America. More than a little utopian, some may be thinking. Yes, but a utopian version is precisely what today's situation requires. These are much too bad for pessimism, or things are much too bad, it has been noted. And as Richard Flanagan asked recently, what reality was ever created by realists? ... What we cannot dream, we can never do. The environmentalist's tale. There are many areas of public concern that can frame the case for this economic and political transformation to a new system of political economy. I will present the environmental one. A half a century has flown by since a group of us have launched the Natural Resources Defense Council, the NRDC. Over that period, the NRDC and other mainstream U.S. environmental groups have racked up more victories and accomplishments than one can count. I shudder to think what our world would be like had they not. Yet, despite those accomplishments, a specter is haunting American environmentalism, the specter of failure. All of us who have been a part of the environmental movement in the United States must now face up to a deeply troubling paradox. Our environmental organizations have grown in strength and sophistication, but the environment has continued to go downhill. The prospect of a ruined planet is now very real. We have won many victories, but we are losing the planet. Climate change is coming at us very hard. A great tragedy is now likely. Around the world, we are losing biodiversity, forests, fisheries, and agricultural soils at frightening rates. Fresh water shortages multiply. Toxics accumulate in ecosystems and in us. But those are global scale issues, some say. We have done better here at home. In some ways, that is true. But the reality is that our domestic environmental challenges are far from met. Half of the freshwater bodies in the United States still do not meet the goal of fishable and swimmable, set for 1883 in the 1972 Clean Water Act. And about half of Americans suffer from unhealthy levels of air pollutants. We have protected an area the size of California as designated wilderness, but since 1982 we have lost open space fully the size of Washington state to development, urban and industrial sprawl. Much of it prime agricultural land. 30% of United States plants and 18% of our animals are now threatened with extinction. Moment of silence for all the animals that I'm going to see die within my lifetime. And these estimates do not take into account the full impacts of likely climate change. America's record of climate inaction must rank as the greatest dereliction of civic responsibility in the history of the Republic. Something is terribly wrong. Clearly, more of the same cannot be the answer. We've had decades of more of the same. Here we are, 5 decades later, the burst of energy and hope at the first Earth Day, headed toward the very planetary conditions we set out to prevent. Indeed, all we have to do to destroy the planet's climate, impoverish its biota, and poison its people is to keep doing exactly what we're doing, with no growth in the human population or the world economy. Just continue to release greenhouse gases at current rates, just continue to degrade ecosystems and release toxic chemicals at current rates, and the world in the latter part of this century won't be fit to live in. But human activities are not holding at current levels. They're accelerating dramatically. It took all of human history to grow the 7 trillion world economy of 1950. Now, we grow by that amount in a decade. The potential for much larger and continuing environmental losses is very real. American environmentalists must take some responsibility for what has happened. In particular, we did not take stock and adjust to the dangerous new conditions ushered in by the Reagan Revolution of 1980. As I will discuss, that was a moment to reassess and reboot. But our part of the blame is decidedly the lesser part. To chronicle the much larger part, it is useful to begin with Frederick Buell and his valuable book From Apocalypse to Way of Life. He writes the following. something happened to strip the environmental cause of what seemed to be the 1970s to be self-evident inevitability. In reaction to the decades of crisis, a strong and enormously successful anti-environmental disinformation industry sprang up. It was so successful that it helped midwife a new phase in the history of United States environmental politics, one in which an abundance of environmental concern was nearly blocked by an equal abundance of anti-environmental contestation. Nowhere has this disinformation campaign been more important and successful than with climate change, all brilliantly documented in Naomi Oreskes and Eric Conway's book, Merchants of Doubt. The disinformation industry that Buell notes was part of a larger picture of opposition. The reaction can perhaps be dated from Lewis Powell's famous 1971 memorandum to the United States Chamber of Commerce, in which he urges business to fight back against environmental and other regulations. Powell, then a corporate attorney who would become a Supreme Court justice, urged corporations to get more involved in policy and politics. Since then, well-funded forces of resistance and opposition have arisen. Especially since Reagan became president, virtually every step forward has been hard-fought. And it's not just environmental protection that has been forcefully attacked, but essentially all progressive causes, even the basic idea of government action in the interests of people as a whole. The history of conservative assault on environmental protections has now been well told in Judith Lazer's important 2012 book, Open for Business. Since the 1970s, conservative activists have disseminated a compelling anti-regulatory storyline to counter the environmentalist narrative, mobilized grassroots opposition to environmental regulations, and undertaken sophisticated legal challenges to the basis for an implementation of environmental laws. Over time, these activities have imparted legitimacy to a new anti-regulatory rhetoric, one that emphasizes distrust of the federal bureaucracy, admiration for unfettered private property rights and markets, skepticism about science, and disdain for environmental activists. By employing arguments rooted in this formula, conservatives have been instrumental in blocking efforts to pass major new environmental legislation or increase the stringency of existing laws. A constantly building opposition is, to my way of thinking, the obvious immediate reason for our mounting environmental failure. But this exercise of power and control is, as I will discuss, merely the surface political manifestation of deeper systemic imperatives. Here is the biggest mistake I believe environmentalists made. As federal environmental laws and programs burst into the scene in the early 1970s, we eagerly pursued the important goals and avenues those laws opened up. There, the path to success was clear. But in doing so, we left by the wayside the more difficult and deeper challenges highlighted by leading environmental thinkers of the 1960s and 70s, Barry Commoner, Paul Ehrlich, Donella Meadows, and others. Sorry if I messed that up. Their overall point was the one that we should strike at the root causes of environmental decline. They saw that doing so would require us to seek fundamental changes in our prevailing system of political economy. To proceed down the path of system change, they saw that the problem was the system. Most of us ignored these calls for systemic change. In particular, we have revisited these deeper issues with our momentum stalled after 1980, especially in the light of anti-environmentalism of the Reagan years. What happened instead was the successes of the 1970s locked us into patterns of environmental action that since have since proved no match for the system we're up against. New laws created major opportunities to make environmental gains, but in pursuing these changes, we were drawn ever more completely inside the DC Beltway. Once there, inside the system, we were compelled to a certain tameness by the need to succeed. As Washington became more conservative, mainstream environmentalists were cautious. In sum, we opted to work within the system of political economy that we found, and we neglected to seek transformation of the system itself. The central precept has been that the current system can be made to work for the environment. America has run a half century experiment testing whether or not it's true. The results are now in, and we have learned that our system of political economy does not work well, to put it mildly, when it comes to the environment. Today's environmentalism is fine as far as it goes. The problem has been the absence of huge complementary investments of time, energy, and money and other deeper approaches to change. And here, the leading environmental organizations must be faulted for not doing nearly enough to ensure these investments in system change were made. System change is essential because our environmental problems are actually rooted in the defining features of our current political economy, and these include the following: an unquestioning society-wide commitment to economic growth at virtually any cost, a measure of growth, GDP, that includes not only the good, but the bad and the ugly, powerful corporate interests whose overriding objective is to generate profit and grow, include profit from avoiding the social and environmental costs they create, markets that systematically fail to recognize these costs unless corrected by government that is subservient to the corporate interests and the growth imperative, rampant consumerism spurred endlessly by sophisticated advertising, social injustice and economic insecurity so vast that they paralyze action and empower often false claims that needed measures would cost jobs and hurt the economy, and economic activity so large in scale that its impacts alter the fundamental biophysical operations of the planet. Those were defining features. I'm going to pause now.